Yesterday, you spent your class time kind of getting an introduction to how your body maintains homeostasis. You had to control the interactive site to try to maintain homeostasis for the person in the simulation. So, we're going to spend a little time today talking about requirements for life, different necessary life functions, and survival needs, and then homeostasis as well. So, in order for life to function properly, for us to have our bodies work the way they're supposed to, we're going to need to have certain things happen. So, one thing that would be a necessary life function would be to maintain boundaries. We have that at the cellular level, where your cells have a plasma membrane to keep everything enclosed. You could also go larger to the entire organism of a human, and say that your skin maintains an external boundary. Next, we have movement. That's going to be locomotion, so moving from one place to another. Or movement can also refer to the movement of substances, such as food passing through our digestive systems or blood going through our circulatory pathways in our blood vessels. Another thing would be responsiveness, so the ability to sense changes and react to those changes. And digestion we have next. So you have to be able to break down and absorb nutrients. Continuing on, we have metabolism. So metabolism, you might have heard that people have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism. What that refers to is how efficiently your body is able to break down the molecules that are entering into your digestive system, break them down from the form they enter your body into a form that your cells can actually use. So if your body, your cells are very efficient at doing that, then we say that that person, quote unquote, has a fast metabolism. If it takes someone longer for those processes, we say they have a slow metabolism. But either way, it's going to be when the cells break down complex molecules into smaller ones. That also happens in our organs on a little bit larger of a scale. You can also build larger molecules from the small ones that you've produced. It's going to allow us to make energy, and this process is controlled by hormones. Another necessary life function is excretion. So you need to be able to get rid of waste from the body. Typically, that's going to be through urine or feces. Sweat is another way you get rid of waste from your skin. Breathing out carbon dioxide is another way still to get rid of waste. And then our other two necessary life functions are reproduction. That occurs on both a cellular level and an organismal level. So on an organismal level, that helps produce future generations for humans, or any living thing that's not unicellular. But reproduction on a cellular level allows for growth, which is another necessary life function. With growth, that can happen in a couple ways. Your cells can increase in size to a certain degree. And then as we grow, really what makes us grow is that we increase the number of cells that we have in our body. Next, if we look at survival needs, things we need in order to remain alive. One is going to be nutrients. So we use those chemicals from our food for energy and building cells. And those chemicals are going to include carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. We need oxygen. We need that for certain chemical reactions to take place in our bodies. In order to actually make energy, which is ATP, part of the process of making ATP just needs oxygen to be present for it to occur. And then another part of making ATP energy actually uses the oxygen in order to get that ATP. So that's really important that we have oxygen. Next, we have water. So water is something else we need to survive. It's between usually 60 and 80% of our total body weight. So because of that, it is the most abundant chemical in our bodies. And we need that to allow the metabolism, or those metabolic reactions that we talked about earlier, to occur. We need to have a stable body temperature. The normal body temperature for humans is about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. which is about 37 degrees Celsius. We also need to have the appropriate atmospheric pressure. And the reason why is it needs to be a certain pressure for gas exchange to occur properly. So an example you can see in this bottom little GIF down here would be mountain climbing. So if you were to go somewhere on a high mountain, it's going to be harder for you to breathe. And it's not that there's less oxygen at like a higher elevation. It is that there's less pressure, so you're not able to use the oxygen as efficiently that's there. So one example I usually give is if you follow football at all, if a football team is going to play the Denver Broncos and they're playing in Denver, they usually go out a week beforehand, where normally they only go like a day or two before. And that is to allow the players to adjust to that difference in atmospheric pressure, so they're not kind of having those negative effects from the difference in pressure than what they're used to. So now we're moving into homeostasis. Part of what you had to do yesterday was to give a definition of homeostasis in your own words. Hopefully it was something similar to what we have here. So maintaining a stable internal environment. It is a dynamic state of equilibrium, meaning that there's constant changes kind of back and forth to make sure that everything is within a narrow range that we need to have in order to survive. So it is necessary for us to have that for our bodies to function properly and to sustain life. If there is a homeostatic imbalance, what that means is that there's a disturbance in homeostasis, meaning that something's wrong, something's not working right, and those imbalances can be caused by different diseases. Now, if we kind of think about homeostasis for those conditions, that stable internal environment to remain stable in our bodies. If you think of it kind of like a seesaw where it's going to go back and forth to allow changes to happen, that's kind of a good visual. So we're going to go through that here. So if there is a variable, if there is something that happens in the body that is causing an imbalance, first we have a stimulus, and a stimulus is what produces the change in a variable. So that could be body temperature, for example, would be our variable. There is a receptor that's going to detect change. If we are using, let's say that it's the middle of summer and you went from an air-conditioned building out into the sun at noon when it's really hot out. So your body temperature is going to go up. You have receptors in your skin, temperature receptors, that will detect that change in temperature. So that input is next, and that's going to be information that is sent along what we're calling the afferent pathway. That goes away from the receptor towards what we call the control center. And that's going to be usually your central nervous system, so either your brain or your spinal cord. So information would be sent to your brain or your spinal cord to say, like, hey, it's really hot. We need to do something about this. Then we would have the output. So there's going to be that information is received by the control center, and then the control center has to send out information along the efferent pathway to cause an effect, to have some kind of response. So then you would have the response of the effector is going to feed back to reduce what we call the effect of the stimulus and returns the variable to normal. So in this case, you probably would start sweating, and as your sweat evaporates, it helps cool your body temperature down. So you are then returned to your normal body temperature. There are lots of examples we're going to go through and practice with those. That is just one example right now, but it's kind of easy for some ways that homeostasis works to compare it to your body temperature, since that's kind of one that's just easy to understand and kind of picture what would happen. With this, we could do the opposite. We could say that it's really cold. Say you go outside in the middle of winter and you don't have a coat on for some crazy reason. Your stimulus, again, would be your skin detecting a change in the temperature. Those temperature receptors in your skin are going to send information to your brain or your spinal cord, which would be the control center. They're going to control your responses. And your output is going to be for your muscles to start contracting and for you to shiver. So that response of shivering, your muscles contracting, that's going to help to generate some body heat to warm you up so you're not as cold. Hopefully you also are smart enough to go inside again, but that's kind of beside the point. If we look, there are what we had in, let me go back here. You have the receptor, the control center, and the effector that are part of this maintaining homeostasis. It's going to be neural and hormonal control systems that happen. So I mentioned neural before, which would be your brain or your spinal cord. You can also have hormonal control, depends on the situation in your body. But with the temperature examples I just gave you, that would be neural control systems affecting that change. So the receptor is going to respond to a change in the environment. So it's going to respond to a stimulus and then send that information to the control center. The control center is, again, it's going to be your brain or spinal cord. It's going to go to your brain for hormonal control in most cases because parts of your brain do produce hormones. Then we have the control center itself. So the information needs to go from the receptor to the control center. The control center determines what the set point should be. What the set point means is what the normal conditions are. It needs to analyze the information and then figure out how to respond appropriately to keep you or anyone else alive. And then the effector is going to give a way for the response to happen. So you sweating to cool your body down, or you shivering to warm your body up. The last thing we have to go over are ways that feedback can happen. There is negative feedback and there is positive feedback. Before we talk about what these mean, I do want to point out that positive and negative don't mean good or bad in this case. Negative feedback is going to actually be most of our homeostatic feedback mechanisms that happen. What negative means is that it's going to shut off the original stimulus or lower the intensity, reduce the intensity of it. And it works kind of like a household thermostat. So if you have your thermostat in your home set on 70 degrees, and let's say that it's set on 70 and it's really hot out, so the outside temperature is making the inside of your house heat up, and say this temperature starts to go to 71, 72, 73. Your air conditioning or cooling system would come on to bring the temperature back down to 70, which would be the set point. And then what's going to happen from there is it would shut off. So it's not going to continue running and lower the temperature. It's going to shut off so once it gets back to 70. So that's going to be how the negative feedback systems work. So both examples I gave you for body temperature going up or body temperature going down if you're cold, those both fall under negative feedback. So most feedback mechanisms, or most of the ways that homeostasis works in our body, are going to be negative feedback. So they just kind of bring it back to normal. Positive feedback is a bit different. It's going to increase the stimulus to push conditions further from normal. With positive feedback, that only happens in a couple instances in our bodies. So negative feedback, again, brings you back to normal. Positive feedback pushes you away from normal. So mostly this only occurs in blood clotting. So for example, if you get a cut, you want that cut to be clotted. You want to stop the bleeding there. So that's going to push that, because normally if you don't have a cut, you don't want your blood to clot, because a blood clot is not a good thing unless there is like bleeding actually happening. When we have blood loss of some kind, we want our blood to clot, which is not a normal thing that happens. So it's pushing you away from normal, and that's why it's considered positive feedback. Childbirth is the other example. So during childbirth, hormones are released that cause the walls of the uterus, that muscle, to contract. And contractions increase and intensify throughout labor. And that is to get the baby out and be delivered from the mother's body. So if you didn't have that continue to increase, if that stimulus didn't increase and push further from normal, then babies would never be born. They would just stay inside the uterus, which we don't want to happen. That would not be a good thing. So again, one more time, and then we're going to watch just a short video to kind of help review those things. Your feedback, positive or negative, those mechanisms are going to happen to allow you to eventually get back to normal. So negative feedback just directly returns you to normal. Positive feedback pushes you away until the issue is gone. So blood clotting should increase until the bleeding is stopped, and then that process would end. Childbirth contractions would increase until the child is born, and then that would end as well. So negative returns you to normal. Positive pushes you further away from normal. I'm sure you remember the Amoeba sisters. So we're going to watch a video to kind of go over these things that we just talked about.
Did you know, just sitting here right now, you're doing something...
I'm going to turn my volume up a little bit. Sorry. Here we go.
Absolutely remarkable? Well, your cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, yes, we just leveled up those biological levels of organization, they're all working towards something called homeostasis. It's a state of balance. Yes, homeostasis means many things in your body. For example, that your blood stays within a certain pH level range. It means that your blood glucose remains within a certain range. It means your internal body temperature stays within a certain range. See, we've mentioned the major body systems before and that they work together. And today we're going to talk about how they work together using something called positive and negative feedback, and also how this relates to homeostasis. So many years ago, I had a pet bearded dragon. Her name was Debbie, and she was the best lizard ever. Debbie used to sit on our couch with me when I'd watch TV, and she loved to have her chin scratched. I even got her a bearded dragon leash so I could take her outside. Yeah, they make those. Anyway, Debbie loved her heat lamp. She would sit under the heat lamp on her rock, and when she got too hot, she would get off her rock and out of the heat lamp range and go somewhere else. She had a huge enclosure, too, because I wanted Debbie to be a happy lizard so she could find an ideal temperature. Why all this talk about Debbie? Well, Debbie is an example of an animal that some people refer to as cold-blooded, or a fancier term, ectotherm. We actually like the fancier term a bit better, though, because her blood isn't necessarily cold. Her body temperature can fluctuate with the environment. But not you. You are warm-blooded, or the fancier term, an endotherm. Your body works hard to keep the internal temperature it keeps. It's also a beautiful example of something called negative feedback. Before we define it, let us show you this example. Say you're in an environment that is very hot, like being outside in the Texas summer heat. That's typically hot. Thanks to nerves which can act as sensors, the brain notices this. It will send signals to counteract this variable. Sweat glands do what they do best, sweat. Heat is lost as that sweat evaporates off your skin. You may have some redness too. That's because your blood vessels are getting wider, dilating, in order to help get rid of that heat. The result, whether you realize it or not, helps you lower your body temperature. But wait, what if you go inside now and the AC is blasting? You'll stop sweating. You may even shiver. The muscle contractions of shivering can generate heat. And those blood vessels will now decrease in diameter size, constrict, to help you conserve the heat, because that makes it harder for the heat to escape. Your body temperature can increase then. This is negative feedback. So a simplified definition, negative feedback is when some variable triggers a counteracting response in order to come back to some set point. If we consider that this whole thing is actually a negative feedback loop, we can see that the negative feedback brings the body back to the set point, which in this case is a stable temperature, keeping homeostasis. Negative feedback is also going on in the regulation of your glucose, your blood sugar. Okay, we're really simplifying this here, as we often do. But when glucose, blood sugar, is too high, one hormone that is released is insulin. I always imagine insulin as this hormone that makes the cells say, feed me, because it has the ability to make cells take in glucose. On the flip side, if glucose is too low in the blood, a hormone called glucagon can be released. This hormone can have many effects, and one of them is that it can cause the liver to release glucose into the blood. There's more to the regulation of blood sugar than this, but you can see how this is negative feedback. You have counteracting responses here in order to keep homeostasis. So, what about positive feedback? Positive feedback is when, instead of getting a counteracting response to some variable, you instead intensify the variable. Positive feedback can be like more, instead of let's counteract this. The example that always stuck with me when I was a student is the example about the human baby being born. In biology classrooms everywhere, it's a classic example. When a human baby is ready to be born, there is pressure on the cervix, and that pressure and the hormones involved cause contractions of the uterus, because that's a big part about how the baby is going to be born. More release of hormones will equal more contractions and pressure, which will cause more release of hormones. More release of hormones will mean more contractions and pressure. Contractions help get the baby out, but it's also a part of a beautiful illustration of what positive feedback can do. So why do we care about feedback? Other than, the importance of negative feedback in maintaining homeostasis and the role of positive feedback in many body processes. Well, we also need to understand feedback so we can understand what is happening when there is a problem in the feedback systems. One example, perhaps you've heard of type 1 diabetes. It's a disorder that can mean that your pancreas, which is an organ that is involved with making some hormones like insulin, is not working correctly. Insulin is not produced, and because of that, one issue is that you're not going to be able to get glucose, the blood sugar, into your cells. Glucose outside of the cells cannot be used in cellular respiration. The cells need to take the glucose in to make ATP energy in cellular respiration. Therefore, your cells need to be able to take in the glucose to survive. So many type 1 diabetics need to give themselves insulin and monitor their blood sugar because the negative feedback may not work as it should. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
All right, so hopefully that helped to make positive and negative feedback a little easier to understand. As I mentioned before, we are going to be doing a lot more practice with figuring out homeostasis feedback mechanisms over the rest of the week. So if you have questions, let me know. I'm sure they'll be cleared up as we go through and practice more things with it. So this video, you should have filled out your notes during this lesson. If not, you're going to need to go back through and use this video to do that, and then you'll submit that assignment for today. Tomorrow, we'll be practicing figuring out different steps of feedback loops and things like that. So that will be it for today. You have your notes that go along with this lesson, and you also have a reinforcement to complete. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.